I know sometimes we like to ask interesting questions to one another, and the question I would ask you today is, think this through, if you had one superpower, what would it be? A superpower, something that's beyond human abilities, and maybe something's come to your mind. I've often, whenever I've thought about that question, I've thought, I wish that I could be omnipresent. That's a big word. That means you could be more than one place at one time, okay? Because so much of my stress in life could be relieved if I could have one of me just spending time with my friends and family, if I could have one of me out doing my job at the same time, if I could have one of me getting all the things done that need to be done around the house and the yard and the errands and all those things, and if number 4 of me could just be out doing what I wanted to do just for fun, and if number 5 of me could just sleep. I mean, if I could have just 5 of me, life would be perfect. That would be my superhero gift. I could just be omnipresent. I can be many places at one time, and then we never have those conflicts of, I need to be here, I need to be there, and one of me could do one thing, and at the end of the day, we'd all come back together and report, and got it all done. Well, neither you or I are ever going to be omnipresent. We can't even be in 2 places at the same time. There's a lot of funny movie skits that show how they're trying to be in 2 places at the same time, and they change their clothes or whatever, and it turns out to be a fiasco. We just can't do it. It's a trait that belongs to God alone. And today we're going to look at that trait of omnipresence. Omni is a prefix that means everywhere, and then presence is mean where they're at. So God is everywhere. So we're going to look at that today. What does that mean? I know that God can be 100% everywhere all the time. That seems far-fetched from a human point of view, but from a God point of view, if God is who he says he is, then why couldn't God be everywhere all at once? And so that's what we're going to take a look at today. In Psalm 139 is one of the best places in the Bible that we learn about God's omnipresence. And this is a very personal psalm. David wrote this about himself, but we could put any of us and all of us in his shoes, and it can be just as personal for me and for you and for you and for you and for you. And that's the amazing thing. God makes this personal for all of us. And so as we try to maneuver the crazy world that we're in, taking this truth that God is everywhere and he's always present with us, helps us to be able to have perspective and to be able to get through our crazy days. So that's our goal today, that we would understand that in a deeper way. I've broken down the psalm into 4 parts, almost 5 parts, and we're just kind of going to go through it a couple verses at a time and see what God has to show us about it. The verses are in your bulletin on the back of the prayer sheet, but it's also going to be up on the screen as we go through it here. So the first thing we're going to see about God's omnipresence is the quality of it, the extent of his presence. And if we look at the first couple verses here, it says, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and you know when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down. You are acquainted with all my ways." Just a little commentary on those verses before we move on. We see God searches. I mean, God is up there in heaven looking, searching at our lives. And he knows us. It's not that he's just looking and can't find anything. He searches and finds. He finds so much that he knows. Have you ever been lost something out in the middle of the yard in the grass? A little screw or a little ring or something, and you search and search and search, and you think, I'll never be able to find it. That's not like God. God searches and he finds, and he knows exactly. We see his external presence. He knows when we sit down. He knows when we stand up. He knows where we're at on the outside, but he also knows what's going on the inside. He discerns our thoughts from afar. He knows what we're thinking. That's kind of scary. That God knows our thoughts, because our thoughts can take us to all kinds of wild places. But God knows our thoughts. He knows what's going on the outside, where we're moving. He knows what's going on the inside, in our hearts and our minds. He even sees us as we're on the move. He searches out our path when we lie down, when we're moving. We can't go any place and leave him. He's not stationary in our house. He's not stationary in our church. He's not stationary in one spot. Where we go, he goes. His eyes are upon us. And he's acquainted with all our ways. He knows what we're doing at any given moment of the day. He knows exactly what we are doing. But he also knows what we say, and he surrounds us on all sides. We'll look at the next few verses here. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it. To think that there's a God out there who even knows what I'm going to say before I say it. He knows exactly what's going to come off of our lips, off of our tongue. He's surrounded us on all sides. He hems us in. It's not just he's leading us and he's up there playing, we play follow the leader. He's around us. He surrounds us. Everywhere we are, he's around us. In front of us, behind us, like the song, that Kim sang about the angels. They're around us as well. That's part of God's presence, but he himself is even right there, all around us. His hand is upon us. It's like he's got his hand on our shoulder, or he's holding our hand, or he's guiding us through as we go through our day-to-day life. Do we ever consciously think about that? We're so busy moving around, but to think that God's holding my hand. He's leading me. He is right here. That's a promise we're told, and it's a promise we can keep. So we see just the quality, the extent of his omnipresence, and the fact that, as I'm just reviewing here, he knows where we are externally. He knows us internally. He's with us as we're on the move. He knows what we do. He knows what we say. He knows what we're thinking. He surrounds us on all sides, and his hand is upon us. Man, if we just stopped right there, it was worth it, digging into this psalm. But it goes on further, and we'll take a look at that. The next few verses talk about the place. Where is God in connection with us? So the next few verses say, where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and I dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. It's very poetic. Definitely very poetic. That makes it even more pleasant to receive the truth that's here. You could have just said, God's everywhere, just take it and go with it. But you did it in such a way that's beautiful. Where can I go from your spirit? A spirit doesn't have a body, right? That's what a ghost is. A ghost is a spirit. It doesn't have a body. It's the internal. Well, God doesn't have a body himself. I know we make pictures of him, big white thing sitting on the throne, but God's a spirit. The only thing of God who has any sort of body is that the Son of God took on a body when he was born as Jesus. And that body stays with the Son of God who's up in heaven now. So when we get to heaven, we're not sure what God the Father and God the Spirit look like because they're spirits. And we'll figure that out when we get there. But we know that the Son of God has a body like we do. But God is a spirit. And so the Spirit of God is there. So how can we get away from it? If it's a spirit, it's not confined to a body. God is not confined to a body up in heaven. God can be everywhere. And where can I flee from your presence? There's so many Bible stories that tell us about people trying to run away from God. Jonah tried to run away from God. The prodigal son in running away from his father is a symbolic story of running away from God. We even think of the great leader in the church whose name was Saul and named to Paul, became the Apostle Paul. He was trying to run away from God as well. But God got his attention on that road to Damascus. And so if God's after us, we can't get away from him. And if somebody will get to the end of their life without God and they'll say, but God, you weren't there. We'll say, no, I was everywhere. I was chasing you. You just wouldn't let yourself be caught. So what great it is, great thing to be able to be caught by God, because we cannot flee from his presence. If I go up in the skies, I mean, think about it. This is back many thousands of years ago, before airplanes and travel. So David is saying, if I went clear up in the skies above the clouds, you're there. Even if I went to Sheol, it's basically saying if I died, even when I died, you're there. Even if I took the wings of the morning, if I just got up and flew like a bird and went across the ocean, across the sea, something that's real in our lives but wasn't real back then, you go anywhere in the world and God is there. His hand will lead us and he will help us. He holds, or he will hold us. So he leads us, he helps us no matter where we go. So the place of him. And the verses go on to say, and if I say, surely the darkness will cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as day, for darkness is as light with you. It's a little bit of a tongue twister here, but basically saying, you can't turn out the light on God. You can't be in utter darkness and not have the light of God with us. At nighttime, when it's more easier to be afraid, we don't have to worry. God is there. And so he's there no matter what kind of darkness, whether it's physical darkness or even maybe symbolic darkness, when evil's around us, the darkness of life, God is still with us. And so these things show us the place of God's omnipresent. The fact that he's a spirit, that we can't run away from him, even if we went up in the skies, even if we die, even if we cross the ocean to another part of the world. If we're in the darkness, no matter what, he leads us and he holds us. What a great promise that we have there. Let's look at the aspect of time as it relates to God's omnipresence in the next few verses here. It goes on to say, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. When was God with us? From the very beginning. Even before we were born, when we were conceived in our mother's womb, God was there. He knew exactly that life had taken hold and those little seeds became something that was alive. And so God was right there, even before we were born. The mystery, the awe of it. Now we can get in, we understand how babies are formed in the womb. Back then, they were in there and then they came out, but they didn't know what went on in the process. With our modern technology, we've lost a bit of that mystery and awe, although it's still amazing. Anytime you see pictures of how the fetus is developing, it's amazing. It really is. So we don't want to lose track of that. Wonderful are your works. Think of all the things God's made and how wonderful it is. We love seeing the beautiful things of nature, but when God created on those 6 days, he made everything and he said it's good, but on the 6th day, after he created humans, he said it's very good. It's like we are the peak of his creation. Everything he made got better and better and better and better. And then when it was done and he saw that we had made it complete, he said, this is very good. Going on here, my frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, in the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. Even before we were born, God has our life each day planned out. We have our organizers and our calendars, and we set our schedules, but God knew all that ahead of time. He had all our days planned out. He knew how many days we would live and how we would live out those days. Our life story was already written. We're just making it come to be as we wake up with each new day. The verses continue. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake and I am still with you. His thoughts to us, they're precious. They are vast. Grab a handful of sand, lay it out on the table, and try to count how many little sand grains are there. It's impossible. But his thoughts to us, towards us, are more than the sands of the sea. And every day, his mercy and his faithfulness is new. We're told that in other places in the scripture. And every day we wake up and we get to do it all over again with God. We get to do it every single day. There's never an end to it. So from the moment of conception, as we're made in mystery and awe, we're the peak of God's creation. He's written everything out, and this is our life story that he's created for us. And day after day, he is there. That gives us some of the time, the breadth of time of God's omnipresence. So where does this lead us? Usually when I preach, I like to bring out the tensions and the things, the challenges that we're trying to figure out. I just don't want to get up and just preach things that just make sense to everybody and everybody's heard it 100 times before. It's like I want us to think. I want us to be challenged. How does faith and life come together? And in this chapter, there's not too much of that. It's just kind of laid out as kind of one of the most upbeat, encouraging passages. But there's a little bit of tension, so we're going to get into that here. The tension comes in the next few verses. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of God, O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? Do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred. I count them as my enemies. Now, this isn't saying we're supposed to go out and hate our enemies. He's saying, I hate the fact that I have these enemies out here. I mean, he's talking about God's goodness to him all along in this psalm, but all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute. God's with me all the time and everywhere, but I've still got all these problems. I've got these enemies. Maybe they're from without. Maybe they're from within. Life still is not perfect. I still wake up, and yes, God is with me, but I've got the same problem I had yesterday. It's not been resolved, and maybe it's gotten worse, or maybe it'll get worse today. And that's the world we live in. So the tension comes, the challenge comes. How do we take knowing that God's with us all the time and everywhere, and not just leave with a euphoria of a high, and oh, I'm so in love with God because he's so in love with me, but how can we take that into the challenges of real life? So David, who's writing this, all of a sudden, reality check. God's everywhere with me all the time, but it can still stink. I still got these enemies out there. But as he looks about the problems that are out there, he goes inward in the next verses. And he says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Yes, the problems are out there, but that only reminds us that we have problems in here as well, inside of us. Our sin, the things that keep us from being able to reflect God's presence in our lives. God, search me, know my heart, so that, not just so that you can know me, but so that I can see the way that I'm supposed to walk. It changes us. The fact that God is present and knows us very intimately allows us to be able to bravely check our hearts. To have those times where we say, how are these things doing in my life? Am I living to the standards that God's given to me? Am I taking steps in growth? Am I moving forward in my faith? Or am I stunted? Am I going backwards? Am I going off on rabbit trails and hitting dead ends? What this does, the understanding of God's presence with us, gives us a chance to reflect. Gives us a chance to be able to examine. Because if God knows what's going on, because I don't understand everything going on in my own heart, I'm confused about a lot of things in my own life. And I don't understand why I think certain ways and why I do certain things and why I end up saying these dumb things. I mean, God, help me to understand. Give me a way of wisdom. Help me to understand. And so, as we worship God in his greatness of who he is and his personal connection with us, it allows us to examine our heart, not to beat ourselves up, but to find the grace and love of God that gives us the courage to take those next steps and to keep moving forward. I put a question in on our bulletin for just some thought. You know, what does God see when he searches my heart? As we reflect our hearts, that's a good thing to ask. God, let me see me as you see me. I want to see the good that you see, but help me to see the bad in me as well, so that I can work on those things. You know, how do my thoughts towards God compared to his thoughts to me? Man, if his thoughts are with us every second of the day, how much more should our reflection of him be that we're thinking about him? It doesn't mean we sit in a chair and stare at a wall and a crucifix and just think about God all day long. We go through our day-to-day life, but is the reality of his presence there as we're thinking, as we're speaking, as we're doing? It's a good challenge for ourselves to be able to think, if God's done that for me, how much more can I strive to do that with God? As we go into communion today, this may be a time just to kind of reflect on those things, to remember that his love on the cross has made all the difference. And so we'll be going into that after we sing the next song. Let's sing this song that'll be up on the screen.